Today, I'm here at the Singapore Botanic Gardens, a favourite for Singapore locals and visitors alike. This garden welcomes over 4 million visitors every year. However, although now one of the city's most popular tourist attractions, Singapore's first botanic garden was established for far more practical reasons. And it wasn't here, in Tanglin. It was 4 kilometres southeast of here, at Fort Canning Park. This is Fort Canning Park, not far from the bustling Clark Quay, and perhaps better known for its military and strategic significance. However, in 1822, Dr. Nathaniel Wallach, the residing superintendent of the East India Company's Botanical Garden in Calcutta, India, sent letters to Sir Stamford Raffles, the founder of modern Singapore, outlining the merits of a Singapore Botanic Garden to investigate and eventually cultivate both indigenous and foreign plant species. In one letter describing Singapore, he says,
"We behold a most enchanting scene of nature, bountiful without parallel, and holding out unfailing reward and successes to everyone who may draw on her riches."
Later that year, Raffles established an area of 48 acres here on the northeast slope of Fort Canning, Singapore's first botanic garden. However, only 7 years later, in February 1829, it closed, possibly for economic reasons, despite Dr. Wallach's insistence in his pitch that the garden would cover its own costs. After that, Singapore was left without a botanic garden for 30 years. During these years, however, Singapore still flourished as a producer of goods harvested from its fertile grounds. Trade and production of spices such as nutmeg and mace became a key part of Singapore's history. On Orchard Road, now Singapore's busiest shopping street, got its name from the plantations which once lined it. But it was on these plantations that men like Lawrence Niven initially found work in Singapore. One of 11 children, Niven grew up in Barony, Scotland, where his family were gardeners by trade. And after completing an apprenticeship there, Lawrence travelled to Singapore in 1846, aged only 20. While little is known about his early years in Singapore, in 1855 he married the daughter of a retired Indian army officer, and in the years prior to 1860 he managed the nutmeg plantations for Charles Robert Prinsep. This transpired to be a serendipitous position, and the point at which his story converges with that of the modern-day Singapore Botanic Gardens. In 1859, a second Agri-horticultural society was formed by a number of public-spirited citizens. Their goal? To create an ornamental garden and leisure park. Following the acquisition of a 23-hectare tract of abandoned plantation land from one of their founders, they hired Niven as a part-time superintendent. A hire possibly born out of convenience, as he was the residing superintendent of the adjoining nutmeg plantation. He was truly in the right place at the right time. Over the course of Niven's 15-year tenure as superintendent of the Singapore Botanic Gardens, he managed the construction of the beautiful Swan Lake, many meandering paths and walkways, the picturesque bandstand, and the planting of the first of several thousand species of flora that can be found in the gardens today. Notably, in 1861, Lawrence Niven himself planted what is believed to be the world's oldest orchid. Here, the native tiger orchid is said to have been growing in the same spot for the last 157 years. In 1866, the gardens were expanded with the acquisition of an additional 10 hectares from the Napier estate here in the northwest. And it was on this spot that the Agri-horticultural Society built a residential home for Lawrence Niven, now known as Burkell Hall, named after Henry Burkell, who was the garden director from 1912 to 1925. The building still stands today in the majestic orchid garden. In the year 1874, owing to lack of funds, the Agri-horticultural Society of Singapore was forced to hand the gardens over to the colonial government. It was at this time that the gardens were entrusted to James Merton, Niven's successor and former manager of the famous Kew Gardens in London, England. In 1875, Niven returned to Scotland due to ill health, and sadly he died shortly thereafter. Niven is credited with the English landscape movement which the gardens so clearly possess here today. Whilst one of the lesser known names in Singapore's history, his legacy certainly lives on here for all to see.